The story of Noah's Ark is a long-standing favorite among Sunday school teachers and in children's storybooks and even kids' songs. I'm not sure I really understand why, though. If you first heard about Noah through those child-friendly stories and songs, then I bet the images that first came to mind when I said Noah are a big flood, all the birds and the animals on the ark, and the bright rainbow at the end. Full stop, no need to go any further. It's mostly just a kid's story, after all. I wonder, though, if we leave the story alone beyond that point, because it really isn't child-friendly at all. Maybe it's safer not to look too hard at it once we're grown-ups. But today I invite you to set aside the image of a floating zoo and a pretty rainbow. I invite you to dust off your imaginations and enter into Noah's story once again. And let's read together how that story begins, from Genesis chapter 6. When the Lord saw how wicked everyone on earth was, and how evil their thoughts were all the time, he was sorry that he had made humankind on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. And so he said, I will wipe out these people I have created, and also the animals and the birds, because I am sorry that I made any of them. But the Lord was pleased with Noah. God said to Noah, I have decided to put an end to all people. I will destroy them completely, because the world is full of their violent deeds. Build a boat for yourself out of good timber. Make rooms in it and cover it with tar inside and out. Make it 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. Make a roof for the boat and leave a space of 18 inches between the roof and the sides. Build it with 3 decks and put it inside. And send fire to destroy every living being. Everything on the earth will die, but I will make a covenant with you. Go into the boat with your wife, your sons, and their wives. Take into the boat with you a male and female of every kind of animal and of every kind of bird in order to keep them alive. Take along all kinds of food for you and for them. Noah did everything that God commanded. In the beginning, it must have felt like a great adventure for Noah and his family. To be seen by God as good and decent people, chosen from among the sea of broken and corrupt humanity, to do this incredible thing for the Lord. To be tasked with building such an enormous ship, there's no Home Depot to buy lumber and supplies from either. This building enterprise from start to finish was the work of Noah and his family. Imagine the sights and sounds of this great work. The thunk and crack of hammer and chisel, the rap of mallets pounding in wooden pegs, piles of lumber slowly taking shape into a ridiculously massive ship. The smell of hot tar as it was slathered over the sides, provisioning for humans and animals alike for months. The laughter and the questions of the rest of humanity, wondering why Noah is investing so much of himself and his family and his resources into this seemingly pointless project. I wonder if Noah and his family tried to explain, tried to offer one last warning that God's judgment was coming, that this boat, this ark, was being built at God's command. Or was it simply too late for everyone else? I wonder if Noah and his family were frustrated and afraid and just as grieved to the heart as God himself was when it came to their neighbors. As the smell of ozone made the air metallic, as dark clouds gathered on the horizon, as the flashes of lightning and the distant boom of thunder drew nearer, I wonder if any doubts crept into the minds of broken, corrupt humanity in amongst all their evil thoughts. For Noah and his family and the animals and the birds, what a gift from God the ark must have seemed. The gift of a lifeline, a rescue from the oncoming storm, and also the gift of purpose and certainty, a task and a mission from God laid out clearly for them as history's biggest downpour was about to begin. Picture in your minds a great ship sitting in the very driest of dry docks, ship's hold open, provisions standing by, and the first rumble of thunder in the distance. Let's read what happened next from Genesis chapter 7. When Noah was 600 years old, on the 17th day of the second month, all the outlets of the vast body of water beneath the earth burst open. All the floodgates of the sky were opened, and rain fell on the earth for 40 days and nights. On that same day, Noah and his wife went into the boat with their 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. With them went every kind of animal, domestic and wild, large and small, and every kind of bird. A male and a female of each kind of living being went into the boat with Noah, as God had commanded. Then the Lord shut the door behind Noah. The flood continued for 40 days, and the water became deep enough for the boat to float. The water became deeper, and the boat drifted on the surface. It became so deep that it covered the highest mountains. It went on rising until it was about 25 feet above the tops of the mountains. Every living being on the earth died, every bird, every animal, and every person. Everything on earth that breathed died. The Lord destroyed all living beings on the earth, human beings, animals, and birds. The only ones left were Noah and those who were with him in the boat. The water did not start going down for 150 days. The province of Ontario went into lockdown on March 17th. It'll be 150 days this Friday, August the 14th, if my calculations are correct. We know, all of us, as we have never known before, exactly what 150 days feels like. Add 40 days of rain and storm to that 150 days at sea, and that's what Noah and his family and the animals and the birds experienced. Let's go into the ark for a moment. Picture in your mind's eye what life was like for them. Everything and everyone would be damp. The air must have been pretty foul with all those animals and birds and people crammed together into a minimally ventilated space. That 18-inch gap under the eaves must have been both a blessing and a curse, letting in fresh air, but also rain and seawater. Humans and animals both, I imagine, would be getting pretty seasick too, with the wind and the storm and the ever-rising waves. And then there is the misery of confinement, shut into the ark by God himself, into the damp and the dark, with rationed food and the same company. The weeks and months of this, with no end in sight, tossed about on a ship that must have seemed suddenly small compared to the endless sea. But Noah and his family and the ark were never, not for a moment, lost on that endless sea. They were exactly where God planned and wanted them to be. Everything that was happening to them was part of God's task for Noah, still part of God's plan for creation. Being chosen by God, the industry and purpose of building the ark, the escape from destruction, yes, we definitely get that that is part of a plan. But now, so is an endless sea and unrelenting days of rain and sunless skies. And that's a little harder to see God at work in. Throughout Scripture, we find a repeated idea where time in the wilderness is part of our spiritual journey toward wholeness in God. After fleeing Egypt, Israel was not lost to the desert, even though they didn't quite know where they were all the time. At the beginning of his ministry, Jesus was not lost when he faced temptation in another desert generations later. Being in the wilderness does not mean that we are outside of God's care or that we've taken a wrong turn somewhere in our lives. But it does mean that our journeys may become hard from time to time, that we may feel far from God, though of course he is never far from us. I wonder if Noah and his family questioned how the waiting and the damp and the smell and the misery could really be God's intent for them. I wonder if they feared that it had all gone wrong somewhere along the way. But After 40 days of rain and 150 days at sea, the ark ran aground on the top of a mountain. Let's read in Genesis chapter 8 what happened next. Noah opened a window and sent out a raven. It did not come back, but kept flying around until the water was completely gone. Meanwhile, Noah sent out a dove to see if the water had gone down. But since the water still covered all the land, the dove did not find a place to light. It flew back to the boat, and Noah reached out and took it in. He waited another 7 days and sent out the dove again. It returned to him in the evening with a fresh olive leaf in its beak. So Noah knew that the water had gone down. Then he waited another 7 days and sent out the dove once more, and this time it did not come back. When Noah was 601 years old, on the first day of the first month, the water was gone. Noah removed the covering of the boat, looked around, and saw that the ground was getting dry. So Noah went out of the boat with his wife, his sons, and their wives. All the animals and birds went out of the boat in groups of their own kind. Noah built an altar to the Lord. He took one of each kind of ritually clean animal and bird and burned them whole as a sacrifice. Noah sent out the strongest, smartest bird he could find in the ark to survey this new landscape they found themselves in. The raven flew and flew back and forth, a swooping black speck in a clearing sky, until eventually land emerged and the raven flew away. Then Noah followed an ancient mariner's tradition of releasing doves, because a dove will instinctively fly straight and true towards dry land. It took 3 tries with the same dove, but eventually Noah knew that it was really over. Imagine what those first steps out onto that mountaintop must have felt like, to stand at last on firm, dry ground once more. Close your eyes if you like and picture it in your mind. An altar built of stones, solid and grounded. Smoke rising up into the brilliant blue sky, Noah with his arms uplifted, responding to what God had done. And sunlight, catching the last of the rain as it evaporates, and God using it to stretch a rainbow across the sky, a symbol of his covenant promise with Noah and with us. I wonder how Noah experienced that promise, how deeply it filled his mind and his heart with trust and confidence in God. Noah's story is full of vivid imagery, and it's so much more than a cheerful kid's story about a zoo and a rainbow. And that's because it reveals all the murky complexity of being men and women of faith in the real world. Noah's world and the people in it had collapsed under the weight of sin and brokenness, their own, each other's, and the kind of brokenness that had pervaded all creation since near the beginning. God's heart broke too, but through Noah and his family and the animals and the birds in the ark, God gave his people hope. Hope for renewal, hope for recreation, and hope for restored wholeness after the flood. Noah's story takes us on a real journey, from the excitement and the purpose of building the ark, the mystery as every animal and bird, even the wild and dangerous ones, marched 2 by 2 into the ship's hold, to the gray, damp misery of life in a wave-tossed world full of uncertainty, and then finally out into a world remade, ready to move forward in wholeness and relationship with God. I wonder if we can each of us find ourselves, our own spiritual journey echoed in Noah's story. Where have you traveled? And where do you find yourself today? Is it in the industry and God-given purpose of ark building, tossed about at sea, though never truly lost to the wilderness, sending out ravens and doves looking for dry land, or standing before God, lifting up your hearts in grateful and joyous response to him? Although we can't see past the present moment, God can, and God has not and never will give up on us. There is always hope. Thanks be to God. Amen.